somewhat encouraged by so many can-do people. I think there are 30 to 40,000 of them fighting for a better future. And at the heart of it, there were so many young people like yourselves who are looking to find a positive dimension in this massive challenge that we have of code red climate crisis. I was there, amongst other things, to launch the TPCC, as you might have seen on social media. This is the first sectoral IPCC type body designed to provide neutral, science-based metrics for tourism. I would say free of any advocacy spin. We'll talk about this more as the lectures continue. And I would urge you to familiarize yourself with the website www.tpcc.info if you want to find out more and how this group of 60 plus climate scientists that we've gathered together intend to produce objective, neutral, science-based material for tourism decision-making as we move forward. And now, back to the serious stuff, today's lectures. In this module, we're going to look at three different visions of tourism. The first one, looking back at the growth of the sector by Professor Alan Machin, who is, I would say, a more traditional tourism thinker, showing us how this activity has grown from 25 million foreign visitors in 1950, mostly US and Europe dominant, to 1.5 billion today, and growing at 1 to 2% faster than GDP all over the world. This will be followed by what I'll call a more countercultural viewpoint from Imtiaz Muqbil, an old friend of mine and a journalist based in Bangkok, Thailand, and someone who's always adopted a non-traditional approach to the industry. And finally, another friend, Ian Yeoman, living now in New Zealand and probably the leading edge tourism futurist. He's going to talk about some scenarios for development. And then we'll round it off with our usual half-hour discussion session. So let's go straight away with Alan Machin.
Hello, I'm Alan Machin. I spent 19 years working in public and private sector tourism and 17 years in higher education, teaching tourism management. As you see, I'm using my book, Making Sense of Tourism, number 1, The Beckoning Horizon. It's the first book of a series I'm working on. I call this lecture Making a Better Sense of Tourism. I have chosen to discuss what tourism is and what it can be by writing about its history. It centres on tourism in Britain and the United States of America, with many examples added from continental Europe. This first book goes only to around 1851. My lecture today will cover the same period. Occasionally I have to refer to much later events so that I can describe some of the thoughts and ideas better. The critics. The critics. I guess many of you will be familiar with some of these views on tourism: weak economics, exploitation, and the rest. Some critics regard tourism as purely a leisure activity, second class when compared with the more important jobs of growing food and making things. Some critics think tourism is only about an annual holiday. At worst, they see it as a frivolous pastime for the rich. Well, there may be some truth in that, but there's far more, I think, to tourism. A look back at history tells us why. The old regime of Britain's tourism history. Here is tourism history as it used to be pictured, at least in Britain. Grand tours, sea bathing, train journeys, etc. 5 cultural forms, different from each other, yet with something in common, and that something was not leisure. A pilgrimage, for example, was not undertaken as a form of leisure. The common demand factor that they shared was that of discovery, learning about religion, about classical Europe, about British society, British places, and the joys to be had by people at play. But tourism has many more forms than those. Making sense of tourism means understanding wider realizations about tourism. The first general history of tourism was John Pimlott's The Englishman's Holiday, published in 1947. Note: Englishman. Not until Maxine Pfeiffer's Going Places, about 40 years later, 1985, did many people consider tourism existing from Roman times to the present day. Many people, including commentators, still think tourism is about holiday business only. Definitions of tourism have changed more than once. The League of Nations definition in 1937 was quite simple: travel abroad with an overnight stay. Today, the United Kingdom Tourism Society definition acknowledges domestic tourism, possible travel to more than one destination, possibly over a long period, and for almost any reason. Not just leisure, but work, health and education, perhaps mixed together in the same trip. Leisure trips are often arranged as part of conference programs, for example. We still use the word tourism. We know what it means, but do we? Is the meaning we give it misleading? The activities, the sheer scope of it, are often not appreciated by journalists, politicians, and even business people. Perhaps we should always say travel and tourism, or just travel. let's review some of the reasons for thinking outside the box, or should we say, outside the suitcase. Challenges to the old historical regime. First, about its beginning. Much earlier than in ancient Rome, people were enjoying many of the things that we define as tourism. It seems nonsensical to talk about prehistoric tourism, but there is the old saying that if an animal looks like a dog, barks like a dog, behaves like a dog, it most likely is a dog. We think there is travel and there is tourism. Are they really different? Prehistoric people travelled. Did they tour? The gatherings at Scantia and Stonehenge, we could add the Ajanta caves in India, the temples of the Nile Valley, the ceremonial sites of the Mayan people in Mexico, or the temples of Angkor Wat in Cambodia. They all had features we would recognise as touristic. Few people in the Roman Empire could travel far. Even fewer were able to travel far for leisure reasons. For those who could, there were route descriptions, transport, overnight accommodation, attractions, tour leaders, banks where they could draw money, and restaurants to eat out. They may not have had any equivalent of our travel companies and agents. They did have much of the infrastructure for touring. It repaid their inquisitiveness. It brought knowledge and ideas. The European pilgrimage. Education. It had a tourist infrastructure. Any pilgrimage aims to refresh the mind and the body. The changes in scenery, the stimulation of new experiences, as well as the spiritual strengthening. Even the physical challenges of the journey, when overcome, bring benefits. The ancient pilgrimage was a tour. Each one was a do-it-yourself journey. Accommodation and transport, religious attractions and events were becoming available. The companionship of like-minded others was important. The meaning and significance of this kind of journey was something new in the world of travel. Other travelling was for worldly motives. Now, personal, emotional and spiritual reasons were introduced. Every later traveller would begin to realise that deeper needs were to be satisfied. The European Grand Tour education. The European Grand Tour was higher education based on travel experience, place visits with a tutor, opportunities for personal research, sometimes very personal, and much observation. Queen Elizabeth I invested in sending Sir Philip Sidney on a grand tour to improve her government's knowledge of other political circles. It helped to start a long tradition of wealthy families sending older children to learn about the world, usually only males, sent through France to Italy, maybe Greece, Switzerland, Germany and a few others. What had been the Islamic countries of Iberia were little used, nor were the Slavonic regions to the east. Learning was selectively based. The implications are significant. The United States of America. The idea of the Grand Tour became popular, partly because it had plenty of opportunities for socialisation and boasting about the whole thing afterwards. Prosperous citizens of the USA had their own versions. Some came to Europe while others travelled in their own country to see what was being achieved. Visiting European regions helped to explain how and why the United States came about. Europe was often admired, but equally considered to be out of date. Americans turned more and more to their own country and the future it offered, but it ignored both Native American and Black American history. The expansion of the USA brought two problems. Newly settled areas had no churches or chapels for their small communities. They also lacked the means to socialise with the wider world within their regions. Sharing religious beliefs and more secular ideas was not easy. Many groups wanted to awaken ideas of direct contact with God and a second coming by Jesus. Perhaps the harder frontier life encouraged and recognised the need. They took religious practice into their own hands. Open-air meetings in organised camps like Cane Ridge in Kentucky resulted. They added a log-built meeting place. Later in the 1930s, they enclosed it all in a stone structure. It was all a new form of tourism. A pioneering United States educational idea blended learning with entertainment, a touch of escapism, and a real provision in higher education. It was in the mould of Thomas Cook's Loughborough visit. We will come to that in a moment, while using the camp meeting format of the Cane Ridge pioneers. Chautauqua is a place in New York State, an attractive lakeside destination. The first participants stayed in tents or town properties. Courses were held in many subjects, largely secular. It became a widespread movement and even saw a formal university founded in due course. Thomas Cook, 1841. Thomas Cook's business, which became the great pioneer of the tourist trade, is well known. Let's remember, though, that Cook had been a religious figure, a preacher on the evils of alcohol, and printer of his own leaflets supporting the temperance cause. He always put first the personal and social improvement of people, using tourism as an educational tour. He believed it worked through informing, educating, and entertaining his congregation, and later his thousands of customers. Many other tourism pioneers would use the same methods. Henry Lunn, T.A. Leonard, Robert Mitchell, and Ernest Wimble amongst them. Cook was an educational innovator in a broad sense. His large-scale organising of excursion trains to London's Great Exhibition in 1851 was hugely important. The show attracted 6 million visitors. It communicated knowledge about the world so successfully that bigger and better shows followed worldwide. Thomas Cook and Son would back up their tours with skilled tour leaders, lecturers and guidebooks. Tour companies around the world did the same, for their general customers and their more specialist clients. Education was the name of the game. Tourism is often seen as some kind of scavenger on the decaying body of traditional industry. Making Sense of Tourism, The Beckoning Horizon, discusses this and gives references. It has an account of a local government debate when I heard a councillor try to use the criticism politically. The Industrial Revolution, in fact, was partly promoted by the ironmasters of Coalbrookdale in Britain. They built this elegant bridge as a tourist attraction, an example of what they could make in iron. They targeted the influencers of their day: authors, journalists, artists and business people. The Great Exhibition of 1851 was another example. It promoted industrial design. It showed the world that Britain was a manufacturing nation. It seems a stupid idea to describe invading armies as tourists. Armies destroy rather than admire. Yet the later design to visit the places in which they fought was often formed during their battles. Some personnel found wartime experience introduced them to foreign travel for the first time. The book gives examples. Post-war armies of occupation were sometimes helped to visit and appreciate places and to respect them, as in the two examples above, one from during the Second World War and the other during the occupational period in Europe after it. During the from Paris by Nazi armies in 1944, General Koltitz refused Hitler's orders to destroy the city. It would have meant the loss of a cultural treasure that peacetime would see people flock to visit. The UK Tourism Society in 2012 made its definition fit the military any main purpose. Warfare is never a good thing, and yet it raises awareness of the world for good and bad. Please excuse my cough. Cooperation and disruption result in equal measure. Innovative technologies are discovered. The landscapes of tourism are painted in stark new colours. Tourism as education is the main theme of my book. Travel to understand is a guiding principle behind most tourism, past, present and future. These are some of the theoretical ideas proposed in The Beckoning Horizon. Even lying on a beach all day in a sunny destination offers memorable experiences and subtle education about life, the world and human happiness. From prehistoric times to the present day, there have been efforts to inform, educate and even entertain visitors. Think of the Stone Age cave paintings at Lascaux in France, or the iconography of medieval churches, noted in the diagram at the bottom left of this slide. Those places were created as showcases for visitors. The examples of tourism we have just been examining show the common theme of discovery. I use that word discovery rather than education because it is something the tourist does for interest and for fun. It is still educational. I'll come back to that in a few moments. Making Sense of Tourism proposes a model of lifelong learning. We all start our discoveries in life by listening to our families, our friends, and in due course, our co-workers. We start to travel on family holidays and then go on our own. Very early comes the influence of the mass media. After some years we enter formal education, school, college, university, adult education. Here is the idea presented diagrammatically. I refer to each of the 4 stages as information streams. They not only overlap but mix and flow like rivers of learning. For example, formal education uses the other streams all of the time. Learning from family and friends in the light of the teaching. Learning from school books and videos. Learning from excursions and longer journeys. It is an iterative process. We use and interpret knowledge from each stream in the light of what we learn from the other streams. Like a water-powered turbine, the streams drive our learning motor faster and more powerfully. Turbocharged learning. Three modes of exploration. We tend to think of an explorer as someone who is the very first to enter a new land or cross a new ocean. Freya Stark, Ibn Battuta, Lewis and Clark, for example. We should say they were the first of their people to do so, bringing to their communities news of places new to them, but which were, of course, already inhabited. In that sense, those explorers are Mode 1, pioneer explorers. Tourism needs Mode 2 explorers, enablers. They set up the systems that help others to visit places. Thomas Cook, Raymond and Whitney in the USA, Ivan Olsson in Sweden, Karl Dagener in Germany. Then there are the tourists themselves. They are Mode 3 explorers. Wherever they go, there are plenty of opportunities to explore places that are interesting and new to them. They could explore their own towns and have fun. There are several classifications of tourists. Eric Cohen, Stanley Plogg, Valine Smith, for example. They give us help in making sense of tourists, their nature and their motivations. As it happens, they shine a light on the perspective that researchers take on the subject. Cohen's typology, for example, is based more on management observations than Plogg's psychological viewpoints. Those researchers describe leisure tourists. They classify people as if they remain fixed in their types. Both were put forward in the 1970s and are still quoted. Plogg's allocentrics and psychocentrics are popular terms. It is more realistic to remember that as lifetime information streams bring wisdom and confidence, so do people move from one stage to another over time. Here on this slide are 3 levels of the tourist. They start as package tourists. Children have their holidays packaged by parents. School trips package them. Young people may buy commercial packages until they feel confident enough to reach the second stage, semi-independence. More confidence leads them towards fully independent planning and actual travel. Yet they will still use services set up by those enablers, especially transport and accommodation. People learn new skills, maturity and judgment. All travel involves discovery and therefore learning. Much modern tourism travel is based on enjoying the sun, sand and sea of coastal resorts. Tourists arrive, sunbathe, swim, eat and drink, shop and socialise. Education is not what they seek, but it is what they get, partially at least, by doing, using trial and error and seeking any information they need. They learn what is good or not so good about their experience. This is heuristic learning, learning by chance and trial and error. At the other end of the scale is didactic learning, perhaps better described as instruction. Think of old-fashioned teaching when children were given facts that they had to learn by heart. Tourism communicates by a range of techniques. The slide shows examples. If well planned and managed, tourism can inform, educate and entertain. Visitors can become loyal supporters and admirers. The spectrum of communication modes available in tourism is matched by a colourful and stimulating range of on-site techniques. We are probably familiar with most of them: printed site guides, human tour leaders, audio-visual equipment and the rest are valuable assets when properly used. The more senses they can engage, the better. There are even little gadgets that create aromas for houses, exhibitions and museums. Imagine a reconstructed farmhouse with the smell of food being prepared, or a forest exhibit with the scent of pine trees. That is communication too. Tourism developers are producers of integrated mass media systems. Tourism consumers and users are audiences. Here are two examples of large-scale tourism development where the integrated mass media can be identified. Harold Lasswell's questions, seen on the slide, can be answered in each case, as is shown in the text. Sir Walter Scott led a campaign to raise the profile of Edinburgh and Scotland early in the 19th century. Cadbury's began to make itself into a visitor attraction to benefit sales. Small developments use similar strategies. A bus company could increase business by using advertising, guide leaders and booklets to create new tours. By arranging stops at attractions and hotels along the way, they could strengthen their product further. In the mass media, one person or one small group can speak to the world. Tourism developers use their media to do the same. Integrated mass media systems are important to understand, whether in commercial marketing or public sector developments. We talk about stories being told. Communication always involves stories, narratives. This lecture is an example. Shaping all the components into an effective whole calls on many skills. Think of newspaper production and how a printed paper can be different from an online version, even when the basic story is the same. Each production job has its part to play and must be well managed, because they can each affect the telling of the final story. Every job involves selection of facts and opinions, words, headlines, images, positions in the overall presentation, and more. Successful tourism developers integrate complex types of mass media. They shape how their audiences see places, people, and environments. Tourism development can be used to spread ideas, improve knowledge, and manage a better world. Thorough reviewing of tourism past shows it to have its roots in prehistory. It has always been an active partner in human affairs. It may be better to speak of travel rather than tourism, but the word tourism is so ingrained in life it is better to remember its definition is today so different. Tourism can inform, educate and entertain, just like friends and family, the mass media and formal education. Tourism development can be used to spread ideas, improve knowledge and create a better world. Stronger, sunnier, networked and better. Thank you.
Sawadee krap. My name is Imtiaz Muqbil. I am the executive editor of Travel Impact Newswire based in Bangkok. I have been covering the Asia Pacific travel and tourism industry since 1981. My detailed notes, research, reports and columns over the last 40 years are now being compiled into an unmatched history of travel and tourism, which I am sharing free so that future generations may learn the lessons of history, replicate our past successes and avoid repeating past mistakes. This lecture, the first one of 2022 in the Power of History series, will explore why the global tourism industry failed to find a balanced development model in the pre-COVID era. It will also include some thoughts on ways to rectify the imbalances in the post-COVID period. Let me begin with this slide, which shows that despite all the good wishes, hopes and prayers for 2022, it is unlikely to be a happy new year. US mayors are already preparing for the next crisis, especially the economic problems and potential social disruptions stemming from the health pandemic. The fear factor is here to stay. The COVID crisis has seen a lot of bluster about rebuild, rethink, restructure, redesign, re-this, re-that. This will be easier said than done, as the world is seriously off balance. The current situation is exactly as I forecast in the February 1999 edition of Issues and Trends, the flagship publication of the PATA Strategic Information Center. Published just 10 months before the dawn of a new century, the edition included a list of 10 balancing acts, which I forecast would take center stage in the 21st century. The very first two opening paragraphs of my analysis made that forecast crystal clear. Please pause the recording here and read it for yourself. Let me also say for the record that PATA itself never took this forecast seriously. The biggest indicator of imbalance in the pre-COVID era was over-tourism, a term used to describe the conditions at many popular destinations as they sagged under the weight of the tourist hordes, destroying the sense of place and leaving a devastating environmental footprint. Until it becomes a crisis, the boundless pursuit of growth was seen as a mark of success. More was better. The balancing principles of carrying capacity were seldom applied. Now, the tourism pendulum has swung from hero to zero. As destinations seek to revive tourism, will they acknowledge making that mistake? Will they learn from the self-inflicted mistakes of the pre-COVID era? Personally, I don't think so. History is sure to repeat itself, and it will be back to business as usual in no time. Making the challenge even more formidable is the perilous state of the operating environment. The many destabilizing geopolitical crises which hit tourism, such as wars, conflict and terrorism, have worsened. As the US mayors themselves are preparing for, the geopolitical environment is dangerously imbalanced, unstable and volatile. Big power gunfights are worsening the sense of insecurity. The so-called UN Security Council is supposed to underpin security, but in fact today has become a source of insecurity. When the elephants fight, the grass gets trampled. There does not appear to be an end in sight. The global economic and financial environment is also facing a rocky road with the advent of cryptocurrencies and the high costs of financing climate change, upgrading safety and security, the massive transition to a gig economy, and meeting the UN Sustainable Development Goals before the target date of 2030. The post-World War II pre-COVID scenario was dominated by the imbalanced influence of the dollar and the Bretton Woods institutions such as the World Bank and IMF. All that is set to change. As economic and geopolitical power struggles are interrelated, the risk of unintended consequences is very high. The third and probably most perilous wildcard is the growing power and influence of the global mega corporations. These conglomerates are always a step ahead of any effort to make them accountable. Their adherence to the fundamental principles of the rule of law and transparency is questionable. There is already concern about the imbalanced influence of Facebook, Google, Apple, and Amazon in the realm of information technology. Add to that the influence of the armaments companies, pharmaceutical conglomerates, and many more. A new breed of special purpose acquisition companies, themselves part of an intricate web of financial networks, will soon own most of the world's prized assets, ranging from airports and hotels to farms and factories. Combined, this amalgamation of power will mean an end to national sovereignty and have a huge downstream impact on democratic rights, freedoms, privacy, and governance. The same tools and tracking technologies used to keep COVID under control can easily be used to track anyone who poses a threat to those in power, with zero accountability. That will set the stage for many more conflicts and crises to come. Now, coming to the impact on tourism. In spite of its size and reach, tourism has never been able to influence global events. It is always being influenced by them. The industry seems to think that events such as terrorism, wars, conflict, and economic crises are outside their control. Although only acts of God are outside human control, the industry suffers from a mental blind spot that nothing can be done about it, as a result of which it does not even try, making that a self-fulfilling prophecy. This lack of backbone and voice on issues that matter also applies internally. Take over-tourism, for example. It was more than obvious many years ago when mammoth cruise ships, aircraft, and convention centers were still in the design stage that sooner or later that capacity would have to be filled. Yes, it would drive growth, but it would also worsen mass tourism. When social activists, environmentalists, and journalists such as myself warned about it, the immediate reaction was to attack the critics for negative thinking or spoiling a country's image. A balanced perspective was most unwelcome. Here's another example. The industry's imbalanced obsession with numbers and growth was clearly reflected in the fact that the entire set of measurement indicators of tourism was all about arrivals, income, jobs, expenditure, and average length of stay. Not a word about the ecological and environmental impact, garbage, sewage, food waste. The UNWTO Tourism Dashboard, arguably the world's best point of global reference, only measures the economic gains. There is no dashboard for the ecological impact, just a reference to the need for suitable balance. Same thing with calculating the real bottom line benefits of tourism. Just focusing on receipts from tourism without factoring in the leakage expenditure is like presenting a corporate balance sheet by only reporting the income while ignoring the expenses. Sure, countries earn millions from visitors, but there is a cost to attracting and servicing each visitor. Millions flow out in the form of marketing and booking fees, management fees, imports of goods and services, building the requisite infrastructure, plus the huge amounts that have to be spent to clean up the environmental mess. That information is never made public. This rah-rah one-sided perspective dominates the travel industry forums and conferences, which are totally devoid of critical thinking and alternative perspectives. Boring moderators ask pre-packaged questions to the same lineup of talking head speakers, usually from the same big-ticket companies. Social activists, human rights advocates, environmentalists are never invited to challenge the conventional wisdoms. The result is a lack of debate and intellectual stagnation. This imbalanced, insipid content is then reflected in the media, especially the travel media. Everything is positive and upbeat. Any attempt to ask pointed questions or challenge the party line is met with an immediate cut in advertising and/or invitations to future events. By contrast, bloggers and influencers who provide dumbed-down entertainment are paid millions. NTOs claim to want quality visitors and are very leery about fake news, but they will not support quality journalism and quality events trying to provide balanced perspectives. Finally, the biggest imbalance is the excessive focus on the future and not much respect for the past. Everyone says they want to learn from past mistakes, but how is that possible without first acknowledging the past mistakes? If travel and tourism wants to vaccinate itself from the next crisis, it will have to rebalance its own agenda, democratize its discussion platforms, reset its own mindset, speak truth to power, and hold those causing problems accountable. Unless that happens, all the industry is doing is treating the symptoms and not the cause, and setting itself up for the next crisis. Thank you for watching. If this lecture gave you food for thought, please click like and subscribe to the Travel Impact Newswire channel. You can also access my earlier groundbreaking YouTube lectures on my website at the link on the screen. Academics, consultants, and anyone else who uses any of the material, please kindly have the professional courtesy to give credit. Thank you and Sawadee Krap.
Good afternoon, Malta. My name is Dr. Ian Yeoman, and what I'm going to talk to you about today is the long view. Climate change and tourism and how it's changing. I'm also going to put it into context around today and what it means from a COVID-19 perspective. So I hope you enjoy this 30 minutes presentation. At the end of the 30 minutes, we'll then have discussion for questions. My name is Ian Yeoman. I'm a specialist researcher in the future of tourism. So some people call me a futurologist or ball gazer. I'm very passionate about the future, and I learned my trade as the scenario planner at Visit Scotland. If you look at the photograph on the left, you will see two people. One's me and the other one's Hugo, my personal assistant. I'm the one with less hair. I'm not the ginger nut as you see in the future. I'm presently based in New Zealand at Victoria University of Wellington, and I have a strong background in tourism futures research For example, I'm the co-editor of the Journal of Tourism Future, and I'm the editor-author of 20 books. And if you speak to Jeffrey, who's a very big Wolverhampton Wanderers fan, I'm New Zealand's #1 Sunderland AFC fan, and that's an understatement. So, what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about why is climate change important? Is it something that's trivial, or is it a matter that's serious? So it's trying to understand the context. What will the impact be on the tourism system? What will the impact be on our products? What does climate change in tourism mean politically? So it's about looking forward, because climate change is one of these issues. To many people, it's a long way away. When we look at IPCC scenarios, they talk about 2050, 2075, but many of the issues and impacts and disruptive effects of climate change are happening today. The one thing we don't understand is the pace of change, when it's exactly going to occur. That change is happening now. So the future is today. It's happening already. So a starting point is, if you look at the history of climate change, and if you look at the history of climate change in policy, it's actually something we've been talking about for the last 30 to 40 to 50 years. I was looking at a paper in the journal Tourist Review in 1947, and there was mention about climate change, mass tourism. More recently, 50 years ago in the 70s, there was this paper that talked about what is the impact of mass tourism on destinations. What does too many tourists mean for the deterioration and degradation for a site? What does too many tourists mean from exploitation of resources perspective? So if you look at the history of climate change and the history of climate change policy, this is not a new debate, and it's rich in the tourism literature from that perspective. And looking at the consideration today is there's an issue with climate change, and if we talk about climate change as a pandemic, we can draw parallels with COVID-19. There's this paper that was published in World Development by Botson this year, and he says COVID-19 pandemic exposes the fragility of our globalized society to shocks. He talks about a natural system, fundamental concerns, and the impact of COVID-19 about sustainability in our way of living. Because the issues that have driven COVID-19, like population growth, mobility, food systems, mass travel, are all similar issues we draw from climate change. The impact of climate change is all about transport, mobility, the impact of climate change on food systems, health risk. So there's a clear correlation between the issues and structures of climate change with COVID-19. So they have parallel importance. The obvious difference, one is happening now very dramatically, whereas climate change is more of the slow burner, more of the long-term effect. But the advantage of climate change is we can now prepare and make decisions for the future, develop policies for mitigation and adaptation, whereas COVID-19, we're in the middle of it, it's happening now. So that's this relationship. So what I want to talk about is to put COVID-19 within the context of tourism, COVID-19 in the context of climate change, and COVID-19 and climate change together, to put that in with from a tourism perspective. So, some of the questions I'm going to talk about and some of the questions I'm going to ask is, what is the future of tourism? But I can't talk about what is the future of tourism by itself. I've got to talk about what is the futures of tourism, because me personally, I can't say exactly what is the future of tourism, because there's no such thing as one future, only a range of alternatives. So right at the heart of this presentation are, what are the futures of tourism from a climate change perspective? The starting point is to understand how the world changes. These are the long-term drivers of change. These are the slow-burning drivers of change. So fundamentally, drivers of change are things that are structural, things that are inescapable forces. They're usually slow trends, unlikely to have significant differences from year to year, and they will impact upon you as the consumer. And to me, there are probably about 8 global drivers of change. Those drivers of change are globalization. We live in this global society without doubt, and you can't get away from that. Globalization is the big issue, and tourism is a global phenomenon. International tourism is about the movement of people from A to B and crossing borders. So tourism is the world's most global industry. The other shift in power, the other significant element is, what are the drivers of change from a global power perspective? And that's about, where is the power today and where is the power tomorrow? And that's fundamentally about, look to China, look to Southeast Asia, because that's where wealth is coming from. These are the countries that will shape policy more deterministically from a tourism perspective. Tourism is about wealth and affluence. Tourism and travel is discretionary spend. So you need to understand where the middle classes of the world are coming from. But also it's about the relationship between a country. It's about affluence and inequality. Because tourism in very developed economies or developing countries is a world of unequals. Imagine going to Africa. The tourist is fundamentally wealthy. The tourist is fundamentally white, whereas the person that serves you, or the servant, is poor and fundamentally black. So it's about relationships, but relationships between people and overcoming inequality, and what tourism does to manage affluence and inequality. One of the big issues looking forward to is how technology will change tourism. And I use the concept technological singularity. This is the moment in time where the processing power of the computer is better than the processing power of the human. Basically, computers can take rational decisions, emotional decisions, irrational decisions. So think about it. Think about Will Smith and the film I, Robot. The biggest driver of change from a global perspective, to me personally, is demography. This is about aging populations. This is about wealth per aging cohort. So, for example, Jeffrey, who's mentoring you today on this, he's in his 70s, 80s, going on to his 90s. Only kidding, Jeffrey, only kidding. But it's about aging populations and what aging populations means for climate change, because where we have extreme temperatures, if we look in the last decade, we look at when we've had extreme heats and heat waves, it's been the elderly population that's been affected more, and where deaths have come from. So this brings us to climate change, and to me, climate change reshapes landscapes, because a destination is what the landscape and the ecology system looks like. If there's no snow, you can't go skiing. If there's no water, you can't have a food system, and the consequences for wine tourism or food tourism. And one of the other concepts to talk about is the concept of mobility. Mobility is about the movement of people, and tourism is about changes in mobility and transport systems. You know, I live in New Zealand, and 99.9% of international arrivals arrive by aeroplane. But mobility has reshaped tourism completely. The beginnings of tourism in New Zealand, it was all about the sailing ships. It took you 6 months to get here if you came by sailing ship. The next change in transport was all about the steamships. That meant you could get to New Zealand in 6 weeks. Then we invented the aeroplane. You could get here in 24 to 48 hours. So see how structural changes in transport and the science of transport and its advancement changes things. But the final one that determines change is how you behave. This is the tourist, this is the leader, this is the manager, this is the destination, human behavior. Here we have a photograph of President Trump from the United States. He's an advocate of popularism, make America great again, somebody that puts business first. And his approach, for example, to climate change is very different from many other countries. You know, under his presidency, the United States has withdrawn from the Paris Agreement, etc., etc. So these are all the drivers of change that shape tourism. So where are we and where are we going? When the United Nations World Tourism Organization started to collect tourism statistics in 1950, they recorded 25 million people took an international holiday. And in 1950, if you went on an international holiday, you were rich. If you flew by airplane, if you were female, you probably wore a hat. If you were male, you probably wore a tie. It was a very upmarket experience. And as a consequence, from an affluence perspective, 25 million people represented 1 in 1,000 people taking an international holiday. Whereas in 2050, based upon my optimistic forecasts, we will have 5 billion people taking an international holiday. And that's approximately 1 in 2 of the world population taking a holiday. So a big shift. And to get from 25 million to 5 billion in 100 years, you make a number of assumptions. And it's one scenario and one forecast. So imagine 5 billion people taking a holiday. What is the impact of that on CO2 emissions? What is the impact on that in the terms of degradation? What is the opportunity for 5 billion people taking an international holiday? Lots of questions which relate to different scenarios and consequences. So climate change and resource scarcity is not an old concept. As you see here, I've just talked about the development of climate change from the 1970s. And I grew up in an era of Greenpeace, fundamentally the world's first environmental campaigners. I grew through an era of the oil crisis of 1973, when the price of oil went from $2 a barrel to $6 a barrel. I've lived through hurricanes. I've lived through China becoming the most pollutant country in the world, overtaking the United States. I've been through many climate change agreements, Kyoto, the Paris Agreement, Rio, etc., etc. So the debate and the development of climate change and policy is not new. Our key question is, where do we go from today? So the key question is, what is the future? And this is a research paper by Husfather and Peters taken from the journal Nature. And they talk about a range of scenarios. They talk about what will the planet Earth look like in the year 2050? Will we see global temperatures in the worst case scenario at 5 degrees increase? Or will it be 4, 3, 2.5 or 1.5? All of these questions are asking you, in different scenarios, what is the impact of tourism in 2050, 2060, 2080, and at the end of the century? How will the world change? What will tourism look like? So you've got different degrees of temperature, different degrees of CO2 emissions and global warming, and they all have different perspectives. And it's important from a climate change perspective to understand these consequences of where they go. So, what is the future? Well, the future is about several dimensions. To me, there's no one single future. The future is about, it's something that can't be observed, but it's something you can understand. It's something you have a conception about. When you're talking about the future, the important thing to me is it also should have a degree of skepticism and a degree of doubt. Lots of people say, oh, that can't happen, but it does happen. The future is full of uncertainty, and one of the roles of my work is to make sense of that future. And I use the technique of scenario planning, which we'll come on to in a minute. The future is very complex. It's fundamentally, it's about driver one. It's not about driver one or driver two or driver three in isolation. It's understanding the impact and relationship of those drivers of change between them. It's very difficult to say when something's going to happen in the future. Precisely, this will happen in 2050, this will happen in 2040. More what I do is to say the future could look like this. These are if these conditions come about. And it's taking those conditions and interpret them different ways. And this is what James Daytner, a professor of future studies at Hawaii University, talks about. He says the laws of the futures are the future cannot be predicted, but alternative futures pondered. And this is what I mean by Daytner's laws of the future. He talks about future one, a world of continued growth. Basically, the past is a representation of the future. Tourism will continue to grow at 4 to 5% per annum. COVID-19 is just a disruptor. We will soon get back to normal. The world will grow. It's a linear pattern into the future. Taking it to its extreme, will COVID-19 take us to a world of collapse and decline? And if we do have collapse and decline, what is the depth of that decline? Is it permanent or is it temporal? How do we deal with that declineness? Scenario 3, or future 3, is about a world of transformation. This is a utopian thinking of the world, taking the convergence of many drives of change. How will they transform society? And this is what you're looking for, I think, from a climate change perspective. What is the future you want? What is the future in the story you want to tell? And finally, future 4 is a disciplined world. This is a world of compromise where, for example, climate change has happened, but we have to live through change. We have to live through change in how we're going to do and how we're going to get forward. A disciplined future is usually the future we live through in order to get through to a transformational future, for example. So, I'm going to talk about my perspectives of the combination of tourism and climate change looking forward. And to do this, I've constructed 4 scenarios or 4 future states of what data talks about. And how I talk about this is based upon how we behave, societal behavior. So it's that driver of change in the terms of human behavior. And the other driver of change I've selected is climate change and resources. And we do that in the context of tourism. So one way we talk about climate change is what is the degree of temperature. So imagine a world of 3 to 5 degrees, or imagine a world of 1.5 to 2.5. And secondly, imagine a world of me first, a world of individualism, or imagine a world where we work together in the terms of cooperation. And if you put those together, I've got 4 stories to tell you, or 4 pictures I'm going to paint of the future. And those 4 stories are called Scenario 1, Crazy Rich Asians, Continued Growth. Scenario 2, Perfect Storm, about collapse and decline. Future 3, Planet Earth, transformational future. Or scenario 4, future 4, it just happened, a disciplined future. All of these are like film titles or book headlines. They describe a world and how it could be. So let's talk about each of the 4 scenarios within context. The first scenario is called Crazy Rich Asians. You've probably seen the film Crazy Rich Asians. It's based upon that. This is based upon the rise of China, Singapore, and the Far East, and their desire to travel. It presumes the rising middle classes. It presumes the #1 item from a luxury perspective is an international holiday. Basically, it puts into context that COVID-19 will be recovered by the end of 2022. And when that happens, we just want to party, party, party and get back to normal. So it believes in a world where economics comes first. It believes in a world where historical patterns of growth from a tourism perspective will be the future. So by 2050, we will have 5.3 billion international arrivals on this planet out of a total planet of 9.7, so nearly over 1 in 2 people having an international holiday. So this scenario is based upon economics as the principal driver of change. The arguments of economics come first. The arguments around climate change is important in this scenario, but it's compromised, it's fudged, because economic wealth is more important. So as a consequence, right at the heart of this scenario is climate change is not a new phenomena. Climates have always changed, so there'll always be degradation. Economics and the progress of humanity comes first. So we have mitigation and adaptation, but it's only moderate. So ponder this. What does this scenario mean for you? The second scenario is called the perfect storm. This is collapse and decline. This is a world where we have resurgence of nationalism, concerns for competitiveness. Because of COVID-19, governments in the last 3 or 4 years have borrowed heavily, and they are handicapped by debt. So as a consequence, they cannot put in procedures to mitigate and adapt for climate change and sustainability. They just cannot afford it. They're very weak in the terms of governance and infrastructure. So the political will towards climate change is at best described as indifferent because of weak global institutions, which results in uneven and uncoordinated responses to climate change. Whereas at the same time, you have highly regulated approaches to climate change in more advanced economies like Europe. But because tourism in this scenario is suppressed economically wise, by 2050, there's only 1.8 billion international arrivals. So climate change, we're seeing clear skies, fresh air, because there's been an organic benefit of no growth. Nature itself has dealt with the issues of climate change because our travel has been suppressed. But this approach is not really good, for example, from a community tourism perspective. Tourism is just for the privileged. It's the end of tourism as you know today in many parts of the world, including the Mediterranean, Pacific Islands, California, and many third world economies. So we go back to what tourism is in the 1890s, where it's for the privileged of this world, the aristocracy. Whereas scenario 3, I wasn't recording this. Whereas scenario 3 is about this planet Earth. Scenario 3 is about your utopia understanding of the future. It's about the world gradually shifts. This is what the world wants. We're creating a pathway for sustainability and climate change. We're emphasizing inclusive developments, respect for environmental boundaries. Decisions about climate change are based on evidence, measurements, and procedures to take it forward. The world cooperates in the terms of legislation implementation, but at the same time, there's lots of opportunity for tourism. Tourism fundamentally changed to a sustainable tourism pathway. Entrepreneurship, innovation, human capital. So we see growth in world tourism in this model at 3% per annum. So it's about a different model of tourism. It's still about mass tourism, but it's a new model in the terms of invention. The fourth scenario, it just happened. Imagine a world where, in a disciplined world, where we've been talking about climate change for the last 50 years, and we're still talking about climate change in the next 50 years. Basically, we can't agree to things, we can't agree to change. So it's a bit uncoordinated. Some countries are doing it and some countries are not. So as a consequence, climate change changes. It just happens. We've been left behind in the terms of doing it. And whatever we do to respond to climate change, it's not good enough or it's too late. And as a consequence, tourism fundamentally shifts. So in the year 2020, imagine 60% of Europeans took a beach holiday in the Mediterranean. By 2050, that figure fundamentally drops because of coastal erosion, rising sea level, and rising temperatures, which make island and beach tourism in the really, it's just not a very nice product. We see seasons shift. We see seasons change in the terms of this. So tourism as it is today fundamentally changes and reshapes. But again, in this scenario, I'm a person of entrepreneurship. I'm an optimist. So tourism's still happening. So in 2050, there are 2.5 billion international arrivals, where the average growth rate is 2%, because the tourism industry still responds, still changes. It's not the end of the world like global collapse. So if we put all of those four scenarios together, what does it mean? So here we have four scenarios: Crazy Rich Asians, The Perfect Storm, Planet Earth, or It Just Happened. So what are the things we're asking? What I'm going to talk about now, what are the signals of each of those scenarios happening today? What are the things you need to observe and indicate? Because these are not futuristic scenarios. These are scenarios with signals of presentism, signals of things happening today. And what I mean by that is, if you take the scenario Crazy Rich Asians, it's a film that's happened. The world is full of those crazy rich Asians who want to holiday, party. This is about the rising middle classes driving the growth of tourism going forward. So there's a strong degree of truthfulness in that trend, in that scenario. Whereas in scenario 2, The Perfect Storm, the collapse of society, the degree of truth that I've got here and the evidence that I've got to support that is, there's been a recent publication by the Australian Defence Forces, the Ministry of Defence, basically saying, prepare for the end of the world. Well, not literally. What I mean to that is Australia must prepare for multiple pandemics, multiple crises, bushfires, climate change, and global insecurity. So we must prepare from a perspective for resilience and adaptation. Whereas scenario 3, this transformational economy, and there's strong evidence of countries doing this. So for example, Norway has said by 2040, all domestic flights will be by electric aircraft. So Norway as a country has facilitated legislation, incentivized the development of electric aeroplanes. So dramatically saying we're going to reduce CO2 emissions and we're going to be a very clean and greened country. Whereas scenario 4, it just happened, we're already seeing evidence and consumers' awareness of where climate change is. So this is a survey by the Foresight Factory, a UK-based global think tank of consumer trends. And they ask questions about economics and environmental concerns. And even if you ask them within the context of COVID-19, what's the biggest threat to society long term? Even with COVID-19, it's still climate change. And what they have said is 79% of Chinese middle class visitors are really concerned about climate change in the way they live. So this is the consumer in China saying climate change will affect me. Climate change is going to change my behavior. So if you take all of the four scenarios, what is the risk in each scenario? The risk in Crazy Rich Asians is, if we don't address the issue of climate change and sustainability, is this going to be the end of tourism as we know? Will society rebel against tourism? And will tourism become the dirty word of society? And this article is taken from Tourism Geographies, which is an academic publication, which looks at that proposition, which looks at that scenario in the terms of how will tourism end, because people think tourism is a dirty word. Whereas the perfect storm is a reality. Imagine if the world ran out of water. Imagine if cities and destinations did not have any water. If you don't have water, you don't have people, you don't have a food system. And that's the reality of climate change. That's the reality of soaring temperatures in cities like Cape Town, where they haven't invested in infrastructure and where they've got climate change, they've got leakage. This is a city that nearly ran out of water in 2018. Whereas planet Earth, basically there's a whole bodies of research is, if you do not adapt to climate change, you will be left behind. If you as a tourism destination do not take climate change seriously, you will be left behind. You will be the tourism destination of failure. And the other comment I'm going to make in scenario 4 is called not in my term of office. And this is a behavioral concept from a political perspective where politicians often fail to undertake expensive measures to limit low probability risks that are unlikely to happen within their term of office, because there's no short-term insufficient reward. And from a climate change perspective, it's all about climate change is going to happen in 2050. It's not about today. It's something long-term and tomorrow. So I'll wait for the next politician to take the decisions. So if we look at the four scenarios, I'm asking you a range of questions for you to ponder and think about. We can discuss these in the discussion forum. Which future are we acting out today? So from your perspective, which future are we close to today? Is it future 1, future 2, future 3, or future 4? Something to ponder. Another question, if you look to the future, based upon the decision making we take today, what do you think is the future that is most likely to occur? Do you think the future is going to be Crazy Rich Asians, The Perfect Storm, Planet Earth, or It Just Happened? Next question to you, which is the future you want to? Which is the future where we should focus and drive policy decisions towards Crazy Rich Asians, The Perfect Storm, Planet Earth, or It Just Happened? What is the future we should strive for and get to? The last question is, which is the worst case scenario? Which is the scenario you don't want to occur? Because each of the four scenarios has risks, has degrees of complacency, has degrees of degradation. So which one should we work not to achieve, to slow down? And finally, each of those scenarios has decisions. You've got to think of decisions to take. So Crazy Rich Asians is, what are the strategies from a mitigation and adaptation perspective you would do to curtail or manage this scenario? Scenario 2 is, how do you avoid a perfect storm? Scenario 3, how do you prepare for a very different future? And scenario 4, how do you ensure it's not too late in the terms of that? So if you put all of those together, considering all 4 scenarios, what are the decisions I am going to take now?